Welcome to Bone Spears and Starships. We are proud to present The Curse of the Shadowbinder. 1. The ancient oaks of Whisperwood loomed like skeletal giants, their gnarled branches clawing at the bruised twilight sky. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, broken only by the rasp of unseen creatures and the rhythmic crunch of boots on fallen leaves. Renzo Blackthorn, his face etched with the grim lines of a warrior who had seen too much, moved with the silent grace of a predator. His broadsword, Whisperfalm, was a dark blur in his hand, its silver inscription catching the occasional flicker of moonlight that pierced the dense canopy. Beside him, Lyra Nightshade, her raven hair cascading down her back like a midnight waterfall, glided with an ethereal lightness. Her onyx eyes, usually alight with arcane power, held a steely focus. Her fingers traced arcane sigils in the air, muttering words of power under her breath. With a flick of her wrist, a shimmering orb of violet light materialized, casting an eerie glow on the forest floor, revealing a set of monstrous paw prints leading deeper into the woods. Behind them, a low whistle cut through the tense silence. Victor Bloodclaw, his crimson cloak blending seamlessly with the shadows, emerged from behind a fallen log. His dual blades, Nightfall and Dawnfang, gleamed with a deadly sheen in the spectral light. A sardonic grin played on his lips, revealing a chipped tooth and a glint of excitement in his steely gray eyes. Finally, Victor rasped, his voice a mere murmur. "The hounds have led us to their den." Renzo grunted in acknowledgement, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. The stench of wet fur and something far more feral grew stronger with every step. He could hear the distant howls, a chilling chorus that sent shivers down his spine despite years spent battling creatures of the night. 3, maybe 4, Lyra murmured, her voice laced with a hint of concern. "They're restless." Renzo reached out a hand, halting their progress. He drew a single silver arrow from the quiver strapped to his back, knocking it on his ancient yew longbow. Whisperfalm shifted in his grip, a silent promise of lethal steel. "Victor," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Take the flank. Lyra, light our path and be ready for their magic." A predatory glint flickered in Victor's eyes. "Always a pleasure doing business with you, Blackthorn." With a silent nod, Victor melted into the shadows, his crimson cloak swallowing him whole. Lyra raised her hand, the violet orb expanding to illuminate a wider swathe of the forest floor. Renzo took a deep breath, the weight of his immortality a familiar ache in his bones. He was a bulwark against the darkness, a shield for the innocent, and tonight, the hunt was on. 2. The stench of blood and fur clung stubbornly to Renzo's cloak as he emerged from the trees bordering the hidden sanctuary. Moonlight, unfiltered by the oppressive canopy of Whisperwood, painted the clearing in an ethereal silver glow. A gentle breeze carried the comforting scent of wood smoke and freshly baked bread, a stark contrast to the horrors they had just left behind. Lyra materialized beside him, her violet orb dimming with a whispered word. Relief softened the harsh lines etched on Renzo's face as he watched her, the moonlight highlighting the exhaustion in her usually vibrant eyes. A cough from behind them drew his attention. Victor leaned against a weathered oak, his blade sheathed but his crimson cloak still damp with the night's battle. "Well fought," Renzo rumbled, his voice hoarse. Victor gave a curt nod, his lips twisting in a semblance of a smile. "Just another night's work for the butcher of Whisperwood." Lyra snorted, a spark of amusement flickering in her eyes. "Always so dramatic, Victor." Before their banter could escalate, a faint creak echoed from the heart of the clearing. A small wooden door, nearly invisible against the rough-hewn stone wall of a hidden building, creaked open a sliver. A sliver of warm light spilled out, beckoning them forward. A weary woman with eyes the color of twilight emerged, her face creased with worry. "Renzo Blackthorn," she greeted, her voice laced with relief. "We heard the howls. Are you all?" "We are well, Seraphina," Renzo assured her, stepping forward. "The threat is neutralized." Seraphina, the caretaker of the hidden sanctuary, ushered them inside. The building was a haven of warmth and light. A crackling fire filled the central hearth, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn wooden walls. Several figures huddled around the fire, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and gratitude. Renzo surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on a young girl huddled in a corner. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, were red-rimmed and swollen from tears. Her tattered cloak barely concealed the raw grief etched on her small face. Lyra knelt beside the girl, her touch surprisingly gentle. "What is your name, child?" she asked softly. The girl flinched but mumbled a reply, her voice barely a whisper. "Elara," Lyra repeated, her voice warm. "We are Renzo and Lyra. We're protectors." Elara looked up, a flicker of curiosity momentarily extinguishing the dull ache in her eyes. Renzo felt a pang of sympathy for the child. He remembered a similar look in his own eyes, centuries ago, before the curse had claimed him. "You lost someone tonight," Renzo said, his voice gruff but kind. Elara nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Serafina placed a comforting hand on Elara's shoulder. "These woods are no longer safe for children, not with the darkness growing stronger." Lyra exchanged a glance with Renzo, a silent communication passing between them. He saw a reflection of his own thoughts mirrored in her eyes, the need, the duty. "We can't keep running," Renzo finally said, his voice low but firm. "We need to fight back." He knelt beside Elara, his gaze meeting hers. "We fight for those who can't fight for themselves. Would you like to learn how to fight the darkness, Elara?" Elara's eyes widened, a spark of defiance replacing the grief. A flicker of something akin to hope flickered to life within them. Lyra smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "We can teach you, Elara. You are not alone." 3. The air in the crow's quill hung heavy with the scent of stale ale, sweat, and something deeper, more unsettling, a cloying sweetness that clung to the back of Renzo's throat like a bad omen. The tavern itself was a labyrinth of shadowed corners and flickering candlelight. Patrons, a motley crew of hardened sellswords, hooded figures, and shifty-eyed merchants, huddled in booths, their hushed conversations punctuated by the rhythmic clinking of tankards. Renzo, cloaked in his ever-present leather armor, scanned the room, his grip tightening on Whisperfong, hidden beneath the cloak. Beside him, Lyra, her raven hair cascading down her back like a shadow, moved with an ethereal grace, her eyes scanning the crowd with the keenness of a hawk. Victor, a wraith in crimson, had already melted into the shadows, his presence a barely there hum in the oppressive atmosphere. They had come to the crow's quill seeking whispers, rumors, anything that could shed light on the encroaching darkness that had begun to consume the land. Whispers turned into hushed voices as they entered, then silence, thick and suffocating. Finally, a figure emerged from the gloom at the back of the tavern. Tall and cloaked in midnight blue, he moved with an almost supernatural grace. His face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, leaving only a sliver of silver beard and a pair of eyes that burned with an inner light, their color an unsettling mix of amber and shadow. Renzo Blackthorn, the figure rasped, his voice a low murmur that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I've been expecting you." Renzo tensed, his hand hovering near the hilt of his sword. "Who are you?" The figure tilted his head, a sliver of a smile playing on his lips. "A friend, perhaps. Or perhaps not. Call me Ardent Shadowborn." Lyra stepped forward, her voice laced with ice. "We have no time for riddles, Shadowborn. We seek answers. The darkness grows, and whispers speak of a rising evil." Ardent chuckled, a dry rasping sound that sent shivers down Renzo's spine. "Indeed, the shadows lengthen, and a storm brews on the horizon. But the answers you seek lie not in whispers, but in secrets buried deep within the darkness itself." Renzo frowned. "You speak of venturing into the shadows," he said, his voice gruff. "The heart of the darkness," Ardent corrected, his amber eyes glinting in the dim light. "That is where the truth lies. But be warned, Blackthorn, the path is fraught with peril. Many have entered the shadows, but few have returned." Lyra crossed her arms, skepticism etched on her beautiful face. "And what price do you demand for such knowledge?" Arden's smile widened, revealing a set of sharpened teeth that glinted like polished obsidian. Knowledge, my dear sorceress, is a fickle thing. It often demands sacrifice. Renzo narrowed his eyes. There was something about Arden, something about his cryptic pronouncements and unsettling presence that set Renzo's instincts on edge. Yet, the darkness was a mystery they couldn't unravel from the safety of a tavern. "We'll hear your terms," Renzo finally said, his voice a steady growl. "But make no mistake, Shadowborn, we are not pawns in your game." Arden tilted his head again, and for a moment, a flicker of something akin to respect sparked in his amber eyes. "Very well," he said. "Then let us discuss the path that leads into the heart of the shadows." He gestured towards a secluded corner booth, shrouded in even deeper darkness. Renzo hesitated, his gaze flicking between Lyra and Victor, who had reappeared at his side, a silent question in his steely gray eyes. With a sigh, Renzo nodded. They were on the hunt for answers, and the path ahead, however treacherous, was the only path they had. They stepped into the darkness, the flickering candlelight swallowed by the shadows as they followed Arden Shadowborn deeper into the unknown. 4. The wind howled a mournful song as Renzo, Lyra, Victor, and Lyra stood before the crumbling archway that marked the entrance to the ancient ruins. Vines, thick as serpents, strangled the weathered stone, their emerald leaves whispering secrets in the chilling breeze. An oppressive silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath their boots. "These ruins are older than legend," Lyra murmured, tracing a weathered inscription on the archway with her fingertips. "They predate even the first twilight, when the world was first touched by shadow." Lyra, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement, clutched the worn satchel Lyra had provided. The young apprentice had blossomed under their tutelage, her raw magical talent slowly taking shape. "What do you think they hold, Renzo?" Victor asked, his voice a low rumble as he scanned the shadows that seemed to cling to the ruins like a second skin. "Secrets," Renzo replied, his gaze sweeping the crumbling walls for any sign of danger. "Secrets that may hold the key to stopping the Shadowbinder." With a deep breath, he placed a hand on the cold stone of the archway and pushed. It groaned in protest, reluctantly grinding open to reveal a gaping maw of darkness. The air within was thick with the scent of dust and decay, a tangible weight pressing down on them. Lyra conjured a shimmering sphere of violet light, illuminating their path as they stepped into the forgotten halls. The passage sloped downwards, the uneven flagstones slick with moisture. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rasp of their breath and the occasional drip of water from unseen cracks in the ceiling. Lyra shivered, clutching her cloak tighter. Renzo sensed her fear and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Stay close," he murmured. "We'll face this together." As they ventured deeper, the passage narrowed, forcing them to move single file. The air grew colder, and the weight of the past seemed to press down on them with every step. Suddenly, a thunderous clang echoed through the passage, followed by a grinding of stone. Renzo whirled around, his hand flying to the hilt of Whisperfang. A section of the ceiling had caved in, blocking their path forward. Dust swirled in the dim light, obscuring the view beyond. Victor stepped forward, his crimson cloak blending seamlessly with the shadows. "A trap," he muttered, his voice devoid of surprise. Lyra dispelled her orb, plunging them into complete darkness. But before panic could set in, Lyra gasped. A faint, ethereal glow emanated from a crevice in the fallen debris. "Light," she exclaimed, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. Following the glow, Renzo carefully maneuvered a large stone, revealing a hidden passage. The air within this new tunnel was stagnant and stale, but the faint glow revealed walls adorned with faded murals depicting nightmarish creatures and scenes of unimaginable chaos. Lyra, her eyes wide with wonder, traced the faded figures with her finger. Suddenly, a glyph on the wall flared to life, bathing them in a soft, white light. Ancient script glowed on the stone, its archaic language indecipherable to all but Lyra. I can understand it," she stammered, her voice filled with awe. "It speaks of a dark entity, a being of pure shadow who seeks to consume the world." Her voice trailed off as she deciphered more of the inscription. Fear replaced awe in her eyes. "It speaks of the Shadowbinder," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And a ritual of eternal night." A cold dread settled over Renzo's heart. These ruins held not just secrets, but a horrifying truth about the enemy they faced. The weight of that truth pressed down on him, but a flicker of newfound determination ignited within him. They were closer now, closer to unraveling the Shadowbinder's plot and stopping them before it was too late. 5. A swirling vortex of inky blackness pulsed before them, the gateway to the Shadow Realm. Renzo, his hand tight on Whisperfong, felt a primal unease crawl up his spine. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, a distortion of the very fabric of reality. Lyra, her face etched with grim determination, held aloft a shimmering orb of violet light, its glow struggling to pierce the encroaching darkness. Beside them, Arden, cloaked in midnight blue, stood with an unsettling stillness. "Are you certain this is the way, Shadowborn?" Renzo growled, his voice strained. Arden tilted his head, his amber eyes glinting with an unsettling light. "There is no other path, Blackthorn. This is where the truth lies, shrouded in shadow." With a deep breath, Renzo stepped forward, the familiar weight of his immortality a grounding force against the swirling chaos. Lyra followed closely, her magic a defiant beacon in the encroaching darkness. As they crossed the threshold, the world dissolved into a cacophony of twisted forms and chilling whispers. The air tasted of ash and despair. The ground beneath their feet was a shifting mass of inky tendrils that grasped at their boots, threatening to pull them under. Grotesque creatures, formed from pure shadow, materialized from the gloom, their eyes burning with malevolent hunger. "Wraiths," Arden rasped, his voice surprisingly steady amidst the chaos. "Mindless pawns of the Shadowbinder." Lyra unleashed a burst of violet energy, incinerating one of the creatures with a sharp crackle. But for every one they destroyed, 2 more materialized from the shadows. Renzo roared, his blade a whirlwind of steel as he carved a path forward, his years of battle-honed reflexes keeping him alive. The very air seemed to press down on them, heavy with an oppressive darkness that threatened to consume their minds. Images of his past, his failures, flickered at the edges of Renzo's vision. He gritted his teeth, forcing his focus onto the present, onto protecting his companions. Suddenly, a deafening shriek tore through the air. A monstrous being, a towering amalgamation of shadows, loomed before them, its red eyes burning with unholy hunger. Renzo recognized it from the faded murals in the ruins, a shade, a lieutenant in the Shadowbinder's army. Arden, his cloak billowing in the unnatural wind, stepped forward. He raised a hand, his voice resonating with a strange power. The very shadows seemed to obey his command, swirling around him and forming a shield that deflected the shade's attacks. "This way," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the din. "There is a hidden passage. It will lead us closer to the Shadowbinder's sanctum." With a final surge of power, Arden blasted the shade back, creating a temporary window of opportunity. Renzo and Lyra didn't hesitate. They followed Arden as he sprinted through a shifting corridor of darkness, the screams of the wraiths fading behind them. The passage twisted and turned, a labyrinth designed to disorient and devour the unwary. But Arden, his movements infused with an uncanny grace, knew the way. Finally, they emerged into a cavernous chamber, the air thick with a suffocating darkness even denser than before. In the center of the chamber, a swirling vortex of pure shadow pulsed, emanating a corrupting energy that gnawed at Renzo's soul. And from within the vortex, a voice echoed, cold and malevolent, carrying the weight of 1,000 devoured souls. "Welcome, Renzo Blackthorn," the voice boomed, its words dripping with malice. "You have come far. But your journey ends here." A figure materialized from the shadows, tall and wraith-like, its form shifting and contorting like wisps of smoke. The Shadowbinder. A wave of dread washed over Renzo, but this time, it was laced with a steely glint of resolve. He had come face to face with the source of the darkness, and he wouldn't back down. 6. The wind howled a mournful dirge as Renzo, Lyra, and Victor stood before the imposing gates of the abandoned citadel. Crumbling towers scraped the bruised twilight sky, their jagged silhouettes resembling skeletal claws reaching for the heavens. Jagged teeth of obsidian lined the citadel's ramparts, a grim testament to the horrors that lurked within. "This place reeks of despair," Lyra murmured, her brow furrowed as she traced the glyphs etched onto the rusted iron gate. "It's been corrupted by shadow for centuries." Renzo tightened his grip on Whisperfang, the familiar weight of the ancient blade, a grounding force against the oppressive aura emanating from the citadel. Victor, a silent wraith in the gathering shadows, leaned against the gate, his crimson cloak blending seamlessly with the encroaching darkness. "A breeding ground for nightmares," Victor muttered, the hint of a grim smile playing on his lips. "Just another day at the office." Lyra shot him a withering glance. "Don't get cocky, Victor. This isn't your usual tavern brawl." Renzo, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward. "Let's not waste time with banter. The Shadowbinder's influence is strongest within these walls. We need to move quickly, find a way in." With a flick of her wrist, Lyra conjured a sphere of violet light, illuminating the intricate glyphs adorning the gate. Together, they deciphered the ancient script, an arcane language that pulsed with malevolent energy. It was a ward, a lock guarding the secrets held within. Lyra channeled her magic, her brow furrowed in concentration. The air crackled with arcane energy as she unraveled the ward's intricate pattern. With a final surge of power, she dispelled the magic, the iron gate groaning in protest as it creaked open a sliver. A wave of inky blackness surged from the gap, tendrils reaching out like grasping claws. Renzo roared, his blade a silver streak as he severed the tendrils, searing the darkness with his enchanted steel. "They won't be happy we're here," Victor stated, unsheathing his dual blades, Nightfall and Dawnfang. Their obsidian edges gleamed with a deadly hunger in the flickering light. They charged into the breach, plunging into the citadel's inky maw. The air grew thick and stagnant, the stench of decay and rotting flesh assaulting their senses. Grotesque shapes stirred in the shadows, their guttural growls echoing through the cavernous halls. Renzo, a whirlwind of steel, carved a path forward, Whisperfang a blur of lethal precision. Victor danced a deadly ballet, his twin blades weaving a tapestry of death as he cut down the shadowy creatures with practiced ease. Lyra, hovering behind them like a radiant beacon, unleashed bursts of violet energy, incinerating any creature that dared approach. They fought their way through courtyards littered with the bones of forgotten souls and climbed crumbling staircases choked with debris. The deeper they ventured, the more monstrous the creatures became, shapeless masses of shadow given form by the malevolent will of the Shadowbinder. Waves upon waves of shadow spawn assaulted them, testing their endurance and resolve. Renzo felt a familiar ache in his cursed bones, the weight of centuries bearing down on him. Yet, he refused to falter. The image of Lyra's determined face fueled his every move, a stark reminder of the world they fought to protect. Finally, after a brutal battle that left them panting and bloodied, they emerged into a vast chamber. In the center, a swirling vortex of pure shadow pulsed, emanating a corrupting energy that gnawed at their very souls. On a raised dais overlooking the vortex stood a solitary figure, shrouded in shadow. Renzo recognized the malevolent aura from the shadow realm, the Shadowbinder. A wave of nausea washed over him, but this time, it was laced with a burning anger. "You've come far, mortals," the Shadowbinder's voice echoed, cold and distorted, carrying the weight of 1,000 devoured souls. "But your defiance ends here." Renzo raised Whisperfang, his voice a steely growl. "Not today, Shadowbinder. We've come to end your reign of terror." A sinister chuckle echoed through the chamber. The battle for the fate of the world had begun. 7. The stench of brimstone and decay hung heavy in the air as Renzo, Lyra, Victor, and Lyra burst into the chamber. In its center, atop a monstrous altar carved from obsidian, swirled a vortex of pure shadow. Within its inky depths, a robed figure chanted in a tongue that sent shivers down Renzo's spine. The Shadowbinder. With a flourish, the Shadowbinder raised a jagged obsidian dagger, its tip pulsing with a malevolent crimson light. As they chanted, the shadows writhed, coalescing into nightmarish creatures, towering grotesques with glowing red eyes and claws dripping with a viscous black ichor. Foolish mortals! The Shadowbinder boomed, their voice echoing with a chorus of tortured screams. You cannot defy the inevitable. The world will drown in darkness, and I shall become its eternal ruler. Renzo roared, charging forward, whisper form a silver blur cutting through the encroaching tide of shadows. Victor, a crimson whirlwind, danced a deadly ballet with nightfall and dawnfang, his blades carving a bloody swathe through the monstrous horde. Lyra, her eyes glowing with arcane power, unleashed a torrent of violet energy, incinerating the creatures caught in its path. But more surged from the swirling vortex, their numbers seemingly endless. Lyra, her face pale but resolute, raised her trembling hands. A surge of raw magic, untamed but potent, erupted from her fingertips, momentarily pushing back the encroaching shadows. Renzo glanced back, his heart swelling with a fierce protectiveness. Lyra, so young, yet her bravery mirrored that of seasoned warriors. He wouldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. Lyra, he bellowed, cleaving a monstrous spider creature in half. Focus on disrupting the ritual. Lyra, with me. We need to break the Shadowbinder's concentration. Lyra, understanding dawning in her violet eyes, launched a concentrated beam of energy towards the vortex. The swirling shadows faltered for a moment, the chanting faltering. With a battle cry, Renzo surged forward, dodging a swipe from a skeletal hand. He reached the base of the altar, the obsidian cold against his fingertips. He needed to get closer, disrupt the ritual at its source. But the Shadowbinder, sensing his intent, unleashed a wave of pure darkness. It slammed into Renzo, the force of it throwing him back many feet. He tasted blood, his vision blurring at the edges. Before he could rise, a dark form loomed above him. The Shadowbinder, his eyes burning with malevolent glee, raised the obsidian dagger high. A valiant effort, Blackthorn, they rasped. But your defiance ends now. Just as the dagger started its descent, a blinding flash of white light erupted from behind Renzo. Lyra, her eyes blazing with raw power, had channeled her magic into a sphere of pure light. The dagger clattered to the floor, the shadows recoiling from the unexpected brilliance. The Shadowbinder shrieked, a sound of fury and frustration. Seizing this opportunity, Renzo sprang to his feet, a primal roar escaping his throat. He charged, whisper from a streak of silver in the white light. The Shadowbinder, momentarily blinded, stumbled back. Renzo lunged, his blade finding its mark. With a sickening crunch, the obsidian dagger shattered in the Shadowbinder's hand. The creature screeched in pain, the shadows swirling around them in a vortex of chaos. Lyra, capitalizing on the distraction, unleashed a torrent of violet energy, aimed directly at the vortex. It struck true, the dark energy swirling within convulsing violently. With a final, earth-shattering scream, the vortex imploded, collapsing in on itself. The shadows recoiled, dissolving into wisps of darkness before dissipating entirely. The chamber plunged into darkness, broken only by the soft glow emanating from Lyra's sphere of light. Silence descended, thick and heavy. Slowly, Renzo lowered his blade, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around, searching for any sign of their enemy. The Shadowbinder was gone. Only a faint wisp of shadow smoke lingered on the shattered obsidian altar, a testament to their victory. Relief washed over Renzo, mingled with a deep exhaustion. He stumbled back, leaning against the cold stone of the altar. Beside him, Lyra and Lyra materialized, their faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. It's over, Lyra whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Lyra placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Yes, Lyra. It's over. Renzo smiled, a tired but genuine smile. As the last embers of exhaustion flickered away, he knew this was just the beginning. The darkness might be vanquished for now, but it would always be. 8. Moonlight, unfiltered and cold, bathed the crumbling battlements of the citadel's highest tower. Wind howled a mournful dirge around Renzo, Lyra, and Arden as they faced the Shadowbinder, a wraith-like figure pulsating with malevolent energy. The battle that had raged through the citadel had finally reached its zenith. "Foolish mortals," the Shadowbinder boomed, its voice a chorus of tormented screams. "You've disrupted my ritual, but you cannot defeat me. I am the embodiment of darkness, the inevitable end." Lyra, her eyes glowing with arcane power, met the Shadowbinder's gaze unflinchingly. "We may not be gods," she countered, her voice laced with defiance, "but we fight for the light within us. And that, Shadowbinder, is a power you can never extinguish." With a snarl, the Shadowbinder unleashed a wave of pure darkness. Lyra met it head-on, a torrent of violet energy erupting from her outstretched palms. The two forces collided in a dazzling display of power, the very air crackling with raw magic. Beside Renzo, Arden stood silent, his amber eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "This is not the way, Blackthorn," he rasped, his voice low and urgent. "You cannot defeat darkness with darkness alone." Renzo frowned, his grip tightening on Whisperfang. "What do you mean?" Arden, a flicker of sadness crossing his shadowed features, replied, "The Shadowbinder feeds on negativity, on the despair and fear within your heart, Renzo. It is the source of your immortality, a twisted curse that binds you to its will." Renzo's blood ran cold. He had always known his immortality was a burden, but this revelation was a dagger to the heart. He was a pawn, tethered to the very darkness he fought against. "But there is another way," Arden continued, his voice gaining strength. "Look within yourself, Blackthorn. You carry a flicker of light, a spark of defiance that has kept the darkness at bay for centuries. Embrace that light, Renzo. Let it consume you, and you can break the curse, sever the connection that binds you." Lyra faltered, her violet energy flickering as the revelation struck her as well. Renzo, his mind reeling, looked deep within himself. He felt it, a tiny ember of defiance, a spark of hope that had never truly been extinguished. He nurtured it, fanned it into flames with every fiber of his being. The light within him pulsed, growing brighter, hotter. It pushed back against the darkness that had always lurked within him, the curse that fueled the Shadowbinder's power. A blinding light erupted from Renzo, banishing the shadows that clung to him for centuries. The Shadowbinder shrieked, recoiling from the unexpected brilliance. The power of Renzo's light resonated with Lyra's violet energy, creating a blinding vortex that engulfed the Citadel Tower. When the light subsided, Renzo stood tall, no longer burdened by the darkness. The curse was broken. He looked at the Shadowbinder, now a diminished figure, its form flickering like a dying flame. "You are no longer bound by my will," the Shadowbinder rasped, its voice devoid of its former power. Renzo raised Whisperfang, the blade glowing with an inner light. "No," he said, his voice filled with newfound conviction. "And the world will no longer be bound by yours." With a swift strike, fueled by the light within him, Renzo ended the Shadowbinder's existence. The creature dissolved into wisps of shadow smoke, dissipating on the night wind. Silence descended upon the citadel, broken only by the ragged gasps of Renzo and Lyra. They had won, but the victory tasted bittersweet. Arden, his form flickering faintly, turned to them with a sad smile. "The darkness is vanquished," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "But the light needs guardians, Blackthorn. Guardians who will fight to ensure it never returns." With those words, Arden too faded away, leaving behind only a faint echo of his presence. Renzo knew, with a certainty that settled deep within his bones, that this was not the end. The fight for the light would continue, and he, no longer burdened by darkness, would be there to lead the charge. As the first rays of dawn painted the horizon with streaks of gold and rose, Renzo and Lyra stood atop the ruined citadel, a symbol of hope and resilience against the encroaching shadows. The world was safe, for now. But they knew, in their hearts, the light would always need its defenders. 9. The first tendrils of dawn unfurled across the eastern sky, painting delicate streaks of rose and gold across the horizon. The ruined citadel, once a bastion of darkness, now stood bathed in the soft glow of the impending sunrise. A hush had fallen over the battlefield, broken only by the chirping of birds returning to reclaim the territory they had briefly yielded to the shadows. Renzo, his armor dented and bloodied, leaned heavily on Whisperfong, its once polished surface dull with the grime of battle. The years, for the first time in centuries, seemed to weigh less heavily upon his shoulders. The oppressive darkness that had clung to him for millennia had finally lifted, replaced by a lightness he hadn't known he craved. Lyra materialized beside him, her violet eyes sparkling with an uncharacteristic vulnerability. The toll of the battle was etched on her face, yet a triumphant smile played on her lips. Together, they had defied the odds, their light a beacon that had pierced through the encroaching darkness. A few paces away, Lyra stood gazing at the sunrise, her face awash in the golden light. The raw fear that had haunted her young eyes had been replaced by a newfound determination. The battle had forged her, transforming her from a terrified orphan into a protector of the light. From the shadows emerged Victor, his crimson cloak blending seamlessly with the dying embers of the night. He was a creature of the night, yet he had stood shoulder to shoulder with them, his blades a whirlwind of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. They were a fellowship forged in fire, an unlikely band of heroes united against a common enemy. Each bore the scars of battle, both physical and emotional, but their spirits remained unbroken. Renzo cleared his throat, the sound raspy and unfamiliar. "It's over," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The Shadowbinder is gone." Lyra stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "For now," she corrected gently. "But the darkness will always find a way to creep back into the corners. We must be vigilant." Lyra turned to them, her voice firm despite a tremor that betrayed her youth. "We'll be ready," she declared, her hand instinctively going to the satchel that held the ancient scrolls containing forgotten knowledge. Renzo met her gaze, a sense of pride swelling within him. He had witnessed her blossom from a frightened child into a powerful sorceress, ready to take her place among them. A wry smile touched Victor's lips, the first genuine expression Renzo had ever witnessed on his usually stoic face. "Always a party pooper, Lyra," he drawled. "Let's enjoy this sunrise, shall we? We may not see another." Lyra snorted, a spark of amusement returning to her eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Victor. We'll see many more sunrises together, hopefully less bloody ones." As the sun rose higher, bathing the land in a warm golden glow, a sense of peace settled over them. The battle had been a crucible, testing them to their very core. But they had emerged stronger, their bonds forged in the fires of adversity. They knew the darkness still lurked, a persistent shadow waiting for an opportunity to return. But now, they were ready. They were the guardians of the light, a beacon of hope in a world ever threatened by shadows. As long as they stood together, united in their purpose, they knew they could overcome any obstacle in their path. The sun climbed higher, painting the sky a vibrant blue. It was a new dawn, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. The world had been saved, for now. But their journey, the journey to protect the light, was far from over. We would appreciate it if you would be so kind too. Like and subscribe. Comment below. We'd love to hear your fan theories in the comments.